Well, shall we make a start, colleagues? It's 2 minutes past the hour. If I could just introduce myself, I'm Andy McDonald, Member of Parliament for Middlesbrough and Thornaby East. I'm one of the vice chairs of this group. So this is a briefing organised by the Britain-Palestine all-party parliamentary group. I think we're all reeling from the scenes that we see on a daily basis, and not least of which is the celebrations in the Knesset over the first stages of legislation that would bring about the execution of prisoners who are yet to undergo any semblance of a judicial process. Horrifying in the extreme. But today we focus on the recent developments in Silwan, a Palestinian majority neighbourhood in East Jerusalem, and the broader context of settlement expansion in the city. Silwan is highly symbolic, situated adjacent to the old city walls, and has been the site of long-standing tensions over land, housing, and Israeli settler activity. Far-right settler organisations have been trying to forcibly displace and evict Palestinian communities from their homes and replacing them with Jewish settlers against international law. And in recent weeks, large-scale evictions have taken place, most notably in the Batan al Hawah neighbourhood. In Batan al Hawah, there are currently 87 families, 700 people who face forced eviction from their homes under the same laws that saw residents of Sheikh Jarrah be dispossessed. Some of them face a deadline of mid-November. Here we are on the 11th, mid-November to leave their homes. In another part, Al Bustan, 116 homes are facing demolition. This area has seen historic demolitions already this year, and some 1,500 people could lose their home. But in recent days in Batan al Hawah, police forcibly removed 3 Palestinian households, displacing 14 people, including children and the elderly. I think we saw some of the footage of some of these events on the social media. And so today's session, we're going to hear from Zuheir Al Rajabi, beg your pardon, spokesperson for the Batan al Hawah Residents Committee in Silwan, alongside a resident currently facing eviction. Now, Zuheir's remarks will be translated from Arabic by another colleague from Ir Amim. We'll also be joined by Amy Cohen, Director of International Relations and Advocacy at the Israeli NGO Ir Amim, which focuses on Jerusalem. Our speakers will provide first-hand insight into the human, legal, and political dimensions of these developments and help frame the challenges faced by Palestinian residents under current Israeli policies. So I'm going to invite Zuheir to speak for 10 minutes, and then Amy, and hopefully we'll go into a question and answer session thereafter. But Zuheir, I hope I've pronounced your name as close to as reasonable as possible, but we're greatly honoured that you're speaking to us today. So may I invite you to address us? Over to you.
If you allow me, I will just translate to Zuheir. عم زهير بقدم نفسه الأستاذ أندي عضو البرلمان البريطاني، وبدعوك لأنك تحكي هلا معنا 10 دقائق. تفضل.
طبعا مساء الخير جميعا للجميع. أنا زهير رجبي، مسؤول لجنة حي بطن الهواء وأحد الأشخاص المتضررين في أوامر الإخلاء.
My name is Zuheir Rajabi, and I am the head of the committee of families of Batan al Hawah, and I am one of the affected individuals by the policy of demolitions and home evictions.
يعني إحنا بنتحدث على 87 بيت أوامر إخلاءات. بدأت أوامر الإخلاءات من سنة 2015 بادعاء لأنه إحنا بانيين على قطعة أرض تعود ملكيتها لليهود، واللي قايم على الإكداش أو الوقف تبع هذه الأرض اللي هو عتيرة كهنين.
من 2015 عم زهير.
أوامر الإخلاءات بدأت، نعم.
We're talking about over 80 houses. The evictions orders started coming starting from 2015 under the pretext that these homes were built on a land that belonged to Jewish people before 1948.
إحنا تقريبا بدنا نصل ل 11 سنة وإحنا بنقاتل في المحاكم الإسرائيلية، إن كان محاكم الصلح أو محاكم المركزية أو محاكم العليا، ونثبت أوراقنا ونثبت ملكيتنا في البيوت تبعتنا ونثبت ما هو حق لنا. إحنا لما إجينا صرنا إحنا يعني على سبيل المثال أنا من ال66 أنا عايش هون، وما قبل ال66 كنت في حارة الشرف في باب المغاربة وطردنا من هناك وجينا سكننا هون.
It's about to be 11 years since we have been since we have been going to courts, to the Supreme Courts and other types of courts in order for us to prove our right to our houses. Uh, many of uh, Many of us have been in our houses for a long time. He mentions that he's been in his house since 1966. And even before 1966, he used to live in the Jewish quarter in the old city. His family used to live in the Jewish quarter in the old city, and they were kicked out of their home there. And since then, they've been living in their homes in Silwan.
يعني بالسنين السابقة ما قبل 7/10/2023 كان الضغط الدبلوماسي والأوروبي والدول اللي كانت تتدخل كان يعطينا حافز اللي إنه نستمر، واللي إنه المحكمة كانت تتعاطى في هذه الملفات وتأخذ في الحسبان، لأنه يوجد دبلوماسيين، يوجد أوروبيين، يوجد بعض الدول اللي كانت يكون لها الدور في الضغط على المحاكم. ولكن ما بعد 7/10/23 تغيرت القضاة والمحاكم الإسرائيلية بشكل جذري.
Before the war started on the 7th of October, the diplomatic pressure and the foreign pressure that was put on the cases that are put against us, it used to give us some hope that the home evictions could stop. But after the war started, the situation have changed dramatically. He mentions that even the judges have changed, and the situation dramatically changed for them.
يعني أتذكر مرات عديدة كان يكون لنا جولات إن كان من دبلوماسيين أو أوروبيين من خلال إيمي، وكنا لأنه مستعدين نستقبلهم، ولكن في غالب الأوقات بعد 7/10 كان يرفضوا لأنهم يعطوهم لأنه يزوروا بطن الهوى، يعطوهم يزوروا البستان، يعطوهم يزوروا سلوان، وكانت تلغى ويمنعوا الدبلوماسيين والأوروبيين من زيارة بطن الهوى.
He mentions that before the war, and along with Amy, there used to be diplomatic visits to Silwan. They would host diplomatic guests to see the situation in Silwan. And he mentions that after October 7th, these visits have been harder to perform. And he mentions that the visits have been canceled or not allowed to happen.
يعني دعني أخبركم لأنه بشهر 6/24 أصدر أول قرار ضد عائلة شحادة 4 سكن بالإخلاء. بشهر 6 القاضي في المحكمة العليا سولبر اللي هو أحد القضاة من المستوطنين والمتطرفين ومعروف لدى المحاكم الإسرائيلية أنه لم يستمع ولم يأخذ بالحسبان لا محامية ولا دفاع ولا أي أوراق ثبوتية، وأصدر القرار لأنه يجب إخلاء هؤلاء العائلات.
ممكن بس تذكر التاريخ الأول عشان صوتك قطع؟
بسنة 1924 بشهر 8 24 بشهر 6 24 بشهر 6 بالضبط ب 24 أصدر القرار بإخلاء عائلة شحادة.
وبعدين القاضي القرار طلعه.
القاضي سولبر رفض حتى الادعاءات المحامية، رفض أن يستمع لأي حدا، وهو القاضي أصدر اللي إنه أنا لا أريد أن أستمع لأي شخص، وأنا يعني في النهاية راح أصدر قرار بإخلاءهم وأنا بدي أخليهم خلص، ما فيش، مش راح أستمع لحدا.
Zuhair mentions that in June 2024, a court order was issued against the Shahada family, an eviction order, and he mentions that the judge refused to hear any appeals on the decision. He mentioned that he doesn't want to deal with he doesn't want to accept any appeals from the lawyers or from the families, and he wants this eviction order performed.
إحنا من شهر 6 بدأت أوامر الإخلاءات تنهال على العائلات بشكل متتالي، وكان أغلب الملفات تأتي بالإخلاءات من قبل القاضي سولبر في المحكمة العليا.
من شهر 6 من نفس العام 2024.
من بعد شهر 6 بدأت الأوامر الإخلاءات تنهال للعائلات مثل عائل غيث، عائلة أبو ناب، برضه نفس القاضي سولبر.
سولبر اسمه؟
سولبر.
He mentions that since June 2024, the eviction orders, the rate of eviction orders have intensified dramatically, and they were mostly issued by the same judge. He mentions that his name is Solber.
يعني اليوم أنا بفكر اللي إنه إحنا 700 شخص موجودين في هذا الحي، أو اليوم صاروا 650 لأنه أخلوا ما يقارب ال 50 60 شخص. يعني بفكر إنه هدول من ال 67 حتى اليوم لم يتم إخلاء 87 عائلة في القدس، وهذه معضلة كبيرة وعار إن كان علينا وعلى أي شخص اللي إنه ما يكونش فيه دور أو يكون في موقف، إن كان من الدول الأوروبية أو الدول العربية أو حتى الدبلوماسيين اللي يكونوا يوقفوا هذا النزيف أو هذا البلاء اللي بيتم ضد المقدسيين.
حكيت من 67 لم يتم إخلاء 86 عائلة.
هذه العائلات لم يتم إخلاءها منذ 67 في داخل القدس، 87 عائلة بمعدل 700 شخص.
He mentions that since the 1967, these 87 families living in the affected areas of Silwan have not been evicted from their homes. He mentioned that we're talking now about around 650 residents after they were 700, and they became 650 as a result of the evictions that took place. He mentions that if these 87 families of Silwan are evicted, it would be a shame on all of us that this tragedy is taking place and happening in front of all of our eyes, and that we're witnessing it happening.
يعني لماذا لا نتحدث بصراحة أن هذا القرار قرار سياسي، وأن هذا ما يدعم هذه القرارات هو أحد أعضاء الكنيسة بن جفير؟ لماذا لا نتحدث لأنه ما يدعون عليه أنه سببه المسجد الأقصى والمرسوم تبع المستوطنين هدم المسجد الأقصى وبناء الهيكل المزعوم، وتكملة للهيكل المزعوم حوض المقدس اللي هي سلوان وادي الجوز الشيخ جراح.
Why don't we call this this policy as it is? Why don't we name it as political decisions? And we should say, like, we should say that, like, we should talk about this and recognize that these policies are being pushed by ministers like Itamar Ben-Gvir, And we should also not forget that these policies are directly connected to the question of Al-Aqsa Mosque and to the build of the Temple Mount, that the aspirations for the building of the Temple Mount. He mentions that Silwan's location, which is in the heart of Jerusalem and very close to Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Old City, is what makes it a prime target for such policies.
يعني يوجد عائلات من ال50، يوجد عائلات من ال60، وجميعهم معهم أوراق ثبوتية إنهم اشتروا هذا المكان أو قطعة الأرض أو البيت اللي موجودين فيه وعايشين من الستينات. يعني فلنفترض إنه بادعاءاتهم اللي بيدعوا فيها، لماذا لم يأتوا إلينا بال70 أو بال80 أو بال90 أو بال2000؟ لماذا أتوا إلينا ب2015 وما فوق؟ لماذا لم يأتوا بادعاءات مسبقة؟ وتعال نرجع لأنه أنت اليوم بتطالبني بالأرض إنها إلك، طب ما رجع لي يا أخي أرضي، رجع لي عقاري، رجع لي بيوت اللي أنتوا استوليتوا عليها في القطمن والبكعة ودير ياسين ولفتة ويافا وحيفا.
The families living in Silwan and Al Bustan are all families that have been living there since the 50s and since the 60s. He asks, why didn't they come to us in the 70s, in the 80s, or the 90s to make these asks? Why are they coming now in 2015 to kick us out of our homes? He mentions that all of these families have evidence that they have bought these houses and they are living in it after legally buying it. And he also mentions that if the policy is intended to bring back the property of people, why aren't we given our property in Katamon, Lifta, or other places that Palestinians have lived in before the Nakba, before the 1967 war or 1948?
يعني صحيح أنا بفكر لأنه في عجائب في القوانين عندهم. يعني أصدر قانون سنة 1972 إنه يحق للمواطن الإسرائيلي استرجاع عقار أو بيت أو أرض، ولا يحق للمواطن الفلسطيني إنه استرجاع عقاره أو بيته الذي سلب منه، بالرغم من إنه الفلسطيني معاه أوراق ثبوتية وأوراق تثبت إنه هذا بيته وعاره، ويعلم أن هذا الإسرائيلي يجلس في بيته وفي أرضه ولا يستطيع أن يسترجعها. أي قانون يسمح للمواطن هذا بأخذ أو المؤسسات الاستيطانية باسترجاع أراضي وعقارات وبيوت كما يدعون، ولا يحق لي كأنا مواطن فلسطيني مع إني أنا صاحب الأرض؟
أي سنة تم إصدار القانون ذكرت؟
1972 صديقي.
He mentions that in 1972, he mentions an Israeli law that was issued in 1972, which gives the right for Jewish individuals to reclaim property that they claim they have owned before the war, while not giving Palestinian citizens the same right, which is to reclaim the property they used to own. He mentions the irony that while Palestinians have legal evidence and many evidence that these properties have belonged to them, the law only gives the right for Jewish individuals with no regard to the fact whether they have like legal evidence of
يعني
owning the property.
يعني أنا يوم السبت إحنا عملنا وقفة تضامنية وكان مشاركين فيها وناس كتير من الإسرائيليين واليساريين وأصدقائنا ودبلوماسيين حتى ممكن كانوا رايحين يجوا، وإنه نرفض الطرد ونرفض التهجير. بالتاني يوم الأحد قاموا مع الأسف بطرد 3 عائلات، عائلتين شويكي وعائلة عودة، من بيوتهم واستولوا على عقاراتهم.
He mentions that last Saturday, people in Silwan, along with Israelis from West Jerusalem and friends of the community, have gathered in Silwan and protested the policy of evictions and home demolitions in Silwan. And he mentions that on the very next day, on Sunday, Israeli authorities arrived to the neighborhood and evicted two families, Shweki and Oude, from their homes in Silwan.
أنا بتصور إذا لم يكن موقف إن كان دبلوماسي أو أوروبي بوقف هذا النزيف، نحن في نهاية العام سنكون عشرات العائلات قد أخلوهم من بيوتهم، لأنه يوجد لدينا 3 عائلات من عائلة الرجبي حتى 1/12، 4 عائلات حتى 60 يوم أنهم يخلوا، ونحن ب16/11 عندنا 5 ملفات ما يقارب 26 عائلة عندهم استئناف المحكمة العليا. إذا لم يكون وقفة تضامنية كما يجب، إن كان دبلوماسيين أو أوروبيين أو من يكن له الدور من أجل إيقاف هذا النزيف، بنهاية العام سنكون خارج بيوتنا مطرودين ولا مأوى لنا.
بس كم عيلة ب 16/11 عندهم قرار الإخلاء؟
16/11 اللي هم 5 مباني، 26 عائلة، هدول عندهم استئناف للمحكمة وعليا ورايحين ياخذوا قرار إخلاء.
Zuhair mentions that he imagines that if there was no strong diplomatic or a European stance on this situation, he imagines that tens of families of the neighborhood will be evicted as soon as the end of the year. He mentions that by the 16th of November, the current month, there are 4 full buildings full of families that are facing an eviction order, which they appealed to it. And he mentions that he imagines that they will definitely get the eviction enacted, and they will be evicted.
أنا أعلم الوقت الذي أعطيت لي هو وقت قصير، وإن أردت أن أتحدث أستطيع أن أتحدث 3 ساعات أو 4 ساعات من أجل شرح وتوضيح الوضع بما يحدث في سلوان وبطن الهوى، لكن أعلم لأنه الوقت الأتيح لي قصير، ولكن أنا بتصور لأنه لازم يكون دور كبير من البريطانيين والدبلوماسيين والأوروبيين من أجل يعطوا رأيهم لهذه القرارات ولهدول العائلات، لأنه حقهم الشرعي إنه يعيشوا في بيوتهم اللي صار لهم 70 سنة في هذه البيوت، إنه مش بالسهل إنك تيجي تطردني بيوم وليلة.
Zuhair mentions that he could speak for multiple hours to explain the situation that the people of Silwan are facing, but we only have short time to speak. But he mentions that he aspired for a strong stance from the international community for the people of Silwan. He mentions that the people of Silwan have the right to their homes. بس شو حكيت عمي آخر إشي عم زهير؟ آسف على حق
لأنه
الناس.
إحنا ناس صرنا 70 سنة عايشين، وبحق لنا نعيش في بيوتنا ونستمر في وجودنا في بيوتنا ونستمر للدفاع عن عقارنا، حق مشروع.
He mentions that we the families of Silwan, we have been living in our homes for 70 years, and our right to our homes is a right that is guaranteed by all means, and our case is just, and we hope for a strong position, a strong diplomatic position on the stance.
Malik, thank you. Zuheir, many thanks for that powerful contribution. I'll perhaps ask Malik to pass on my thanks and the thanks for everyone on this call, but also to agree with you that it is a matter of shame for the international community that so many people are facing eviction from their homes. you have a lot of allies and friends in the UK Parliament, and please rest assured that we will use the information that you have given to us today to put pressure upon our ministers to in turn put pressure on the Israeli government. Diplomatic pressure is an important part of trying to preserve people's rights and seeking justice. But I thank you very much for your contribution. I don't want Malik, might you be able to pass those thanks on?
Of course. عم زهير، بشكرك السيد أندي ماكدونالد على حضورك ومشاركتك اليوم، وبأكد لك إنه حقا عار على المجتمع الدولي إنه هذا الإشي عم بصير قدام أعيننا. وبأكد لك إنه في لك أصدقاء وحلفاء داخل البرلمان البريطاني، واعلم إنه إحنا رح يعني نعمل كل ما بوسعنا إنه نغير هاي الحالة.
Many thanks. If we could now turn to our next speaker, to Amy, Director of International Relations and Advocacy at Ir Amim. Amy, would you like to take the floor?
Yes, sure. I'm here. Can you all see me? I don't know if I'm
Thank you.
spotlighted or not. Thank you for the opportunity to join you. And of course, many thanks to Zuheir and Malik for joining. And particularly during this time, as Zuheir noted, you know, that we and them most importantly experienced evictions and forced displacement just 48 hours ago. And so, and I want to, you know, on behalf of this gathering, also thank Zuheir for taking this time to brief the individuals that have attended, because it is a very traumatic experience. So I want to thank him for that, and also to thank you all for joining. I don't think I don't want to take a lot of time and add anything, because I think it's most important to hear from Zuheir and also from Malik, particularly as Zuheir is the representative of the community, and he himself and his family are facing forced displacement within, it could be the next few months. However, I do want to maybe just take a few minutes to underscore the severity and the urgency of the situation right now, and to also say that we are all working under, of course, massive pressure, and a place that since October 7th, but even before that, it has been of course run by policies of discrimination and policies that are very much based on a Jewish supremacist outlook in terms of how do we increase as much control over land, and how can we increase the Jewish population while completely depleting and uprooting Palestinians from their home. And so what we have seen, you know, since October 7th is obviously the mass devastation in Gaza and this ongoing genocide and rampant settler violence in the West Bank. However, what's happened in East Jerusalem has unfortunately been very much overshadowed, because the focus has been on so much wide-scale devastation. But at the same time, it's also important to note that there are so many efforts like the one that is happening in Silwan that are done through all of these bureaucratic mechanisms, that at the end of the day, it all goes back to an overarching policy of displacement and dispossession of Palestinians from their lands. And it doesn't necessarily, at the end of the day, you know, that there's different mechanisms, and at the end of the day, it all goes back to this one particular goal. And I think that's really important for you all to also take back to the rest of the parliament, to the public, and so forth, and calling upon the ministers and the foreign minister to engage with the Israeli government that enough is enough, and there needs to be accountability. And, you know, there was a lot of talk regarding the actual legal systems in which we are working. And so the legal system is an Israeli system. It is domestic Israeli law that Zuheir was referring to and talking about, that essentially it institutionalized discrimination within Israeli domestic law that allows for Jews to reclaim alleged assets that belonged to them before 1948, while depriving Palestinians of that same right to retrieve the thousands of dunams of property that they lost on what became Israel after 1948. But I think what needs to be underscored here, one moment, is that even in the event that there is this institutionalized discrimination that is based on ethno-national identity within Israeli law, we need to remember that East Jerusalem is occupied territory according to the international community, and under international law, it's occupied territory. And so therefore, all of these moves, whether it is couched in this kind of a legitimate legal language regarding Israeli law, at the end of the day, it is a complete violation and breach of international law and amounts to forcible transfer. And one of the things that I want to quote one of our colleagues here named Zakaria Odeh, who works for another Jerusalem-based Palestinian organization, and I'm quoting him. And he said something very profound, and he said, here in Jerusalem, you don't need, your Apache helicopters, and you don't need your fighter jets and your armed drones to create masses of displacement, and you don't need a bunch of wild, violent settlers going on rampages. What you need is actually the Israeli government and their proxies through settler organizations actually using the bureaucratic means and the laws within Israel to actually displace, whether it is through bulldozers like demolitions, or whether it is through these legal mechanisms that allows Jews to take over property one by one. And so that brings me back to, again, that this is the way that Israel is using, is actually carrying out displacement in East Jerusalem, but yet under this guise of, say, legality. That is one. And the second thing to really underscore, and this is what Zuheir was saying, is that we have seen a surge now of evictions, in particularly Batan al Hawah, since October 7th. And these surge of evictions happened just in the past 15 months, where we've had 9 families, including the 3 families just 2 days ago, that were displaced. That is nearly 50 people from one community. And I think the last thing that I want to underscore here is that if it's not halted, this will ultimately be the largest expulsion and concerted settler takeover of one single community in East Jerusalem since 1967, if it's not halted, because we're talking ultimately about 700 individuals from one community. And so with that, I want to, on behalf of Ir Amim, on behalf of, most importantly, Batan al Hawah and Silwan, is to really emphasize the need for accountability. And we and our partners on the ground can do whatever it takes to try to litigate before the Israeli courts. But as we have seen over and over again, there is a complete complicity with the Israeli courts, that time and time again they have ruled on behalf of the settler organizations, and they have ruled to completely evict and displace a place. Ultimately, it will result into the entire community if there is not intervention. And so it goes back to, again, I want to reiterate what Zuheir said, without some sort of international engagement and intervention on behalf of the community, we could see, and in this entire neighborhood being erased. But as I want to quote from Ta-Nehisi Coates in his recent book, and he said, when he came to Silwan, what he saw going on was a slow and steady ethnic cleanse. And in order to stop this, we need partners in the international community to put a halt to it, and to encourage their governments to engage with Israel and to hold Israel accountable and say, enough is enough. This is destabilizing the region, and this is displacing Palestinian communities left and right. And so I think that's what I will probably end with. And if I don't know if anyone else has anything else to say, but I turn it back to you, Mr. McDonald.
Thank you so much, Amy. That was absolutely superb, and I think encapsulates the issue beautifully. It occurs to me as you were speaking that time after time, the whole story has been about forced displacement and ethnic cleansing, and that facade of some legal process to further these evictions is grossly offensive. And of course, that it not being a system that all people can access equally is yet more evidence of an apartheid system being rolled out and implemented in East Jerusalem. For our part, I would ask for your comment and guidance, because we will want to try to distill what we've heard today in terms of the demands that we make of our own government. And I'm sure that my good friends and colleagues at Caabu, our excellent secretariat, can help us distill that into to demands of our own government. But are you in a position to help us in terms of the United Nations at the moment, what they are making of these developments? These are imminent forced evictions on an unprecedented scale. So it's up to individual parliaments and parliamentarians to press internally within their own jurisdictions. Are you able to say anything about what might be happening on the UN stage in this respect?
I can say, I mean, I don't know if I could give anything specifically. I know that we have for a long time have been in contact with the UN and are constantly advocating and, of course, providing data and the latest data on the ground. But in terms of any sort of concerted efforts to stop that, I mean, at the end of the day, it's so difficult because we have the United States, who sits on the UN Security Council and essentially vetoes the majority of resolutions that have been proposed. Of course, this was in the past, for an end of the war, right? An immediate end of the war, which would also include a ending displacement, right? So in that sense, I don't feel like it has been very effective, though of course the member states are very aware, and again, we have been in constant contact with them. It is my feeling, and correct me if I'm wrong, and maybe someone from Caabu can also say this, is that I honestly believe that there needs to be more engagement from actual member states, but as a collective engagement from various different member states and governments, including those who are considered even closer allies to Israel, because at this point we have a government who essentially takes orders from no one except for Trump right now. I mean, right? So I feel like in some sense, we're all working with like limited resources in that regard. But I think that, from your end, I think it would a very, very strong statement if we could get the UK to take a stand, especially since there was a recent recognition of Palestine. And so here it is, okay, this is Jerusalem, it's the core of the conflict. We have an entire community that faces mass expulsion. And here we're going to actually make a tangible move and to make a statement in regard and actually call for some sort of accountability, right? And an end to this. Whether, and yes, and I know some of these things can go on behind the scenes, but I think also making a lot more public attention around it is also something that is extremely needed and necessary.
Thank you, Amy. Before I throw it open to colleagues on the call to make their contributions, I just would say that some of the information that has been imparted today from Zuheir and from yourself does give us the opportunity to distill that into an early day motion, perhaps, where we could encourage colleagues across the House of Commons to lobby by way of agreeing to an EDM, early day motion, to press our government for action. There are other techniques that would be available to us, and we'll probably talk about these offline as to whether this could warrant an urgent question on the floor of the House of Commons, which would bring the appropriate minister, which would again be Hamish Faulkner, to the dispatch box, so that at least we can get a clear indication, understanding of A, what the UK government's view of these matters are, and B, and perhaps more importantly, what demands it's making of the Israeli government to pull back from these forced evictions. So I'm sure those are things that we would wish to take up offline. But before I say any more, would anybody on the call wish to make a contribution? I don't know whether colleagues from Caabu, Chris might like to come in at this point.
Thank you very much, Andy. Chris Doyle from Caabu. I just wanted to ask Amy and Zuheir, and obviously we're very laser focused on UK policy and position. How often do you get visits from UK diplomats? Do they come down to Silwan? Do you feel that there is some reasonable expression of solidarity there, or are they not bothering anymore?
So I can, Malik, do you want to translate that to Zuheir? So
Yes, sure thing.
yeah, hold on.
أستاذ زهير، بسألك الأستاذ كريس دويل على زيارات الدبلوماسيين البريطانيين على سلوان. قديش يعني الوتيرة تبعت الزيارات؟ هل بيجوا كتير؟ وهل بتشعر إنه في تعاطف من قبلهم، ولا إنه يعني هل تشعر بتعاطف من قبلهم يعني على الوضع في سلوان؟
شوف، الصحيح أنا إجا عندي أكثر من مرة دبلوماسيين، وكمان دبلوماسيين تانيين من دول أخرى، والتعاطف موجود. التعاطف موجود، واللي إنه هم رافضين للي بيصير موجود، وإن إنهم ضد الإخلاء وضد طرد العائلات الفلسطينية موجود. ولكن أنا طبعا لما أنا بحكي عن 87 عائلة، بحكي عن 700 شخص. أنا لا أريد فقط التعاطف، ولا أريد فقط اللي إنه هم شاعرين معي بالظروف اللي أنا بمر فيها، بس أنا بدي ضغط دولي، ضغط من دولتهم على إسرائيل، على اللي مين له الدور عشان يقدروا يوقفوا هذه الشغلة أو يمنعوا هذا الشغلة. هذا أنا بالنسبة لإلي. ولا موجود التعاطف دائم موجود من أي شخص بيجي عنا، بتعاطف وبشعروا إنهم من بكى في الحي.
شكرا أستاذ زهير. Zuhair mentions that there are many diplomats who come and visit him and visit the 87 families in Silwan. He mentions that some of them are come from the UK. As to the question whether he sees sympathy, he mentions that everyone who comes and make a visit to Silwan does sympathize with the people of Silwan. He says that we always feel the sympathy, but the problem is we don't want sympathy. We want pressure by those who come and visit us from diplomats and officials. He mentions that we want pressure against those who make these policies and promote such policies of displacement in Silwan. And yeah, that's it.
Chris,
And I'll just,
sorry.
I was just going to add that, yeah, we are very much in touch with the British diplomats, and You know, I think it goes back to what Zuheir basically said, is there's all this sympathy and there's a lot of awareness of what is going on in Silwan. I think that what we really need to do now is to essentially capitalize on all of these delegations that have come to the community and have stood in solidarity and heard these stories, and to say, you know what, now is the time to act, because of the fact that it is now playing out on the ground. So while in the past perhaps the threat was looming, the threat is now being carried out. I will say this, that there was recently took the delegation from the Foreign Affairs Committee of the UK Parliament. So they did visit Silwan. They met with Zuheir back a few months ago. So that is also something to perhaps try and mobilize them, as well as the members of Parliament that are on the International Development Committee. They are also have visited recently. This was about 9 to 10 months ago, before the evictions had been starting to be carried out. So I think, again, these are individuals that can perhaps be contacted and mobilized for this.
Thank you so much. And I think Zuheir saying to us that we don't want sympathy, we want pressure, I think is absolutely on the point. And thank you, Amy, for reminding us about the interests of our other colleagues on the Foreign Affairs Select Committee and International Development. They are a very significant cohort of people in this Parliament who also speak very vocally on this issue. And if we are drawing more attention to this abomination currently, you're quite right. I think we're duty bound to try and capitalize on that. And as I say, we'll probably take those issues offline as to the best way of doing that. But there we are. Are we any other contributions from our speakers? I can't see everybody, so if anybody's indicating and want to speak up, please barge in. Is anybody else who'd like to come in at this point?
Just to also add on what we just discussed, I've been welcome into Zuheir's. You probably won't remember because you've received so many delegations, Zuheir, I'm sure, over years, but also been on delegations and gone to Zuheir's home in Silwan. So there's a number of parliamentary colleagues that have visited Zuheir's home. I think some which are still MPs as well. So we will pursue that. Just a sort of, question about actually for Zuheir and Amy, but in terms of the families that were forcibly evicted a couple of days ago, are they still in Batan al Hawah, still in Silwan with other family members at the moment, or have they gone to been forced to go to other areas of Jerusalem at the moment? And I suppose also, this maybe sounds like a very absurd question, but in terms of how are you feeling, Zuheir, and how is it impacting you? You're also, you have the threat yourself, but also you're representing so many other families and individuals and acting on their behalf and doing amazing advocacy, and so that the toll on you must be huge. And so obviously our continued love and solidarity with you and your family.
So Malik, I wonder if you might try to convert that into two short requests as to what's happened to people that have been so displaced, and then secondly, how Zuheir is.
Yes, of course. أستاذ زهير، السيد جو بيسألك على العائلتين اللي تم إخلاءهم يوم الأحد. بيسألك السؤال الأول، هل ما زالوا موجودين في حي بطن الهوى؟ هل ما زالوا عايشين في الحي؟ وبيسألك يعني على التطورات اللي صارت معهم من وقت الإخلاء. والسؤال الثاني هو موجه إلك، يعني بصفتك ممثل عن العائلات اللي مهددة بالإخلاء، وبصفتك برضو شخص متأثر بشكل مباشر من قرارات الإخلاء اللي بواجهها الأهالي. السؤال إنه كيف أنت يعني كيف حاسس، كيف يعني كيف أمورك أنت بشكل شخصي مع كل موجة الإخلاءات اللي بواجهها أهالي سلوان؟
يعني أنا حابب بس أول شغلة أورجيكم هذا أحد البيوت اللي استولوا عليه قارون المستوطنين وأطفال المستوطنين على سطح المبنى. هذا البيت اللي تم الاستيلاء عليه أول أمس، بيت عائلة أم زهر شويكي.
آه
أنتم تستطيعون أن تروا كل هؤلاء العائلات ماذا يفعلون في هذا البيت. هذا أحد البيوت اللي تم الاستيلاء عليه أول أمس. ثاني شغلة أنا بس اللي حابب أحكيه اللي إنه عائلة أم زهر شويكي لم لم يبقوا في سلوان مع الأسف. اليوم الأماكن في سلوان ضئيلة. اليوم لا يوجد في داخل القدس بيت تستطيع أن تستأجره من أجل أن تعيش، لا يوجد. ومن أجل ذلك هم يسعون جاهدين لإخلاء بيوتنا المقدسيين وتسكين المستوطنين من أجل أن نذهب خلف الجدار، أي بمعنى بمناطق كلنديا، العزرية، رام الله، بيت لحم وإلى آخره. وهذا ما يسعون إليه.
Mr. Zuhair was initially showing us scenes from the house that was taken over yesterday by Ateret Kohanim. He was showing us the Israeli settlers on the rooftop of the house. He also mentioned that Zuhair, which is an owner of one of the houses that were evicted on Sunday, he mentions that Zuhair and the other families have left Silwan. He mentions that there is no room in Silwan and even in Jerusalem, Jerusalem as a whole. He mentions that Palestinians in Jerusalem are pressured to live behind the separation wall, basically out within the borders of Jerusalem, but behind the separation wall, in places like Kalandia, Al-Azariya, or even cities in the West Bank. So he generally mentions the pressure that is put on Palestinians of Jerusalem to leave Jerusalem and live outside. And yeah, بتحب تجاوب على السؤال الثاني أستاذ زهير؟
السؤال الثاني ايش كان؟ معلش
اللي
انا
هو
ما
انت
انتبه.
عنك يعني كزهير، انت مع كل الاشياء اللي بتصير وكممثل عن العائلات، إيه، يعني تحكي لنا عن نفسك، عن موقفك حاليا.
يعني شوف، ممكن انا حامل على كاهلي 700 شخص، حامل على كاهلي ليس فقط عائلتي، حامل على كاهلي كل بيت يتم إخلاؤه. إنه أنا أشعر اللي إنه انتقص شيء من هذا الحي، إنه هذه مسؤوليتي وأنا لم أستطع أن أنجز المهمة اللي إنه أحافظ على هذه العائلة. يعني أم زهري لما أخلوها أصيبت بجلطة ونقلوها إلى المستشفى، وبالأمس فقط روحت من المستشفى. يعني أنا بتصور اللي إنه الحمل تقيل علي، الصحيح عبء كتير علي، ومع الأسف أنا مش قادر يعني إني أعمل، برغم اللي إني بعمل جهود كتيرة وبحاول اللي إني أوصل الرسالة كما يجب لأكثر عدد من الدبلوماسيين والأوروبيين واليساريين وكل هذا، ولكن لا، في النهاية لا أستطيع أن أنجز شيء. فهذا يعني يعطيني خيبة أمل، يعطيني مع الأسف خيبة أمل لأني لم أستطع أن أحمي هؤلاء العائلات.
In response to the second question to Zuhair, he mentions that the responsibility of around 700 individuals falls on him personally. And with every house that is evicted or demolished, he mentions that he feels like he has a personal stake in this, and he gets personally heavily disappointed and affected by each house that is evicted and each family that leaves the neighborhood. So he he takes it very personal, uh, and he feels greatly disappointed with every case, with every family that is evicted from their home.
Thank you, Malik. Thank you so much for that. I think as we come to the end of our time together, I wonder if you'd be kind enough to reaffirm our thanks again to Zuheir, to also communicate that we are sending him not just our best wishes and solidarity, but an assurance that we will keep at these issues and that he and his friends and neighbours are in our thoughts, and we will continue to strive to disrupt these evictions. We're not in a strong position, none of us, but we will do everything that we possibly can to have some influence. But please do convey our very best wishes.
أستاذ زهير، عضو البرلمان السيد ماكدونالد بيجدد شكره لك على مشاركتك وعلى حضورك اليوم، وبأكد لك إنه أنت ليس فقط معك تعاطف أعضاء البرلمان، لكن بأكدوا لك على عزمهم على فعل كل إشي بيقدروا يسووه لتغيير الحالة هاي. بذكر برضو إنه إحنا مش في موقف قوي، كلنا مش في موقف قوي، لكن إحنا رح نعمل أقصى ما بوسعنا إنه نغير هاي الحالة. فبجدد شكرا لك، بشكرك كتير على حضورك. إذا بتحب تحكي أي شيء بقدر أترجم لك.
أنا بشكركم، وبتمنى إنه الرسالة تبعتي تصل بأسرع ما يمكن، لأنه الوقت بدهمنا وما فيش عنا وقت. يعني أنا بتمنى اللي إنه تقدروا أو تستطيعوا لو تعملوا شيء قليل لهؤلاء العائلات. شكرا لكم وشكرا على وقتكم كمان.
Zuheir thanks everybody for the chance to be here with you and to express and deliver on the situation in Silwan. He asks that you make any possible effort, any little effort that you can make for these families that are affected. And he thanks you all.
And we thank him, and thank you, Malik, for your
Of course.
expertise.
Of course.
This has been wonderful.
I hope I have been as clear as possible.
You've done yourself and Zuheir proud. And thank you, Amy, for your expertise. And
thank you too much. شكرا لكم. شكرا. Thank you, Amy.
Excellent.
Bye bye.
Bye. But thank you, Amy, again for your expert input. I think as we take our discussions offline as to what we now do with this and the efforts we make in this place, I think your contribution will continue to be vital. I think getting across the personal stories, the human impact upon people, I know in Caabu will assist us in that process, but we need to get these human stories told in this House of Commons so that ministers take note and we can bring that to life. But I really want to thank you for your contribution as well today.